a queen dethroned by her own sister, murdered on the steps of a temple by order of Mark Antony, buried in a tomb no one claimed. For 100 years we believed we had found her remains, the evidence said otherwise. In January 2025, a team from the University of Vienna published an analysis that closed a century of speculation. The skull of Ephesus never belonged to Cleopatra's sister, and what the evidence revealed about who she really was changes everything we thought we knew about one of antiquity's most studied mysteries. Who Arsinoë IV really was. To understand why this skull mattered so much, we must first know the woman it was supposedly from. Her name was Arsinoë IV, and her story is one of the most tragic in the entire Ptolemaic dynasty. Arsinoë was the daughter of Pharaoh Ptolemy She. She had several siblings, among them an older sister destined to become the most famous woman in ancient history, Cleopatra VII. When their father died, he left Egypt in the hands of Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy VI, who were meant to rule together. But the Ptolemaic family had a brutal custom. They killed each other for power. In 48 BC, Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria. He allied himself with Cleopatra, and Arsinoë, the younger sister, made a decision that would change her life. She rebelled. She escaped from Alexandria, joined the Egyptian army, and proclaimed herself queen against her own sister. For a brief time, Arsinoë led an army against the forces of Rome. She was barely 15 years old, but she lost. Caesar captured her and took her to Rome as a war trophy. In 46 BC, Arsinoë was forced to march in chains through the streets of Rome, behind a burning effigy of the lighthouse of Alexandria, the symbol of her momentary victory against Caesar. It was Roman custom to strangle the most important prisoners at the end of the triumphal parade. But something unexpected happened. The people of Rome, upon seeing the young princess chained and humiliated, felt compassion. The public pressure was such that Caesar did something extraordinary. He spared her life. Instead of executing her, he exiled her to the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Arsinoë became a priestess. And there she lived, far from Egypt, for several years, always watching her sister, knowing that Cleopatra would never consider her completely defeated. Her fears were justified. In 41 BC, Cleopatra seduced Mark Antony, the most powerful man in Rome after Caesar's death. And according to ancient historians, one of Cleopatra's conditions for their alliance was brutal: eliminate her sister. Mark Antony ordered the execution of Arsinoë on the steps of the Temple of Artemis. It caused a scandal throughout the Roman world. Killing someone who had taken refuge in a sacred temple violated all divine law. Arsinoë was, according to the sources, between 22 and 27 years old. She was given an honourable funeral and a modest tomb, and for nearly 2,000 years no one knew where that tomb was. The 1929 discovery and the 1990 hypothesis. In 1929, Austrian archaeologist Joseph Kiel found something unusual in Ephesus: an octagonal tomb, built in marble, originally surrounded by a circular colonnade and topped by a stepped roof. Its architecture recalled the lighthouse of Alexandria, the very monument behind which Arsinoë had marched in chains through Rome. Inside, a marble sarcophagus. Inside the sarcophagus, a skeleton. Kiel opened the sarcophagus, examined the skeleton, and made a decision that would shape the case for a century. He took only the skull to the University of Vienna. The rest of the skeleton remained in Ephesus and was lost during World War II. The skull was filed away in Vienna for decades, with a yellowed handwritten note that read simply, "Skull of Ephesus." No name, no hypothesis, no apparent significance. And there it stayed, forgotten, for more than 60 years. In 1990, researchers took another look at the octagonal tomb of Ephesus, and they began connecting the dots. The architecture was in the Egyptian Ptolemaic style, extremely rare in a Greek city under Roman rule. The dating matched the 1st century BC. And there was a historical fact that fit perfectly. Arsinoë IV, sister of Cleopatra, had died in Ephesus at exactly that time. and had received, according to the sources, a modest and honourable tomb. The hypothesis arose almost on its own. The octagonal tomb was Arsinoë's burial place, and the skull in Vienna was her skull. It was an elegant hypothesis. It fit the history, it fit the architecture, it fit the dates. It was only missing one thing: proof. In 2009, nearly 20 years after that hypothesis, the BBC produced a documentary titled Cleopatra, Portrait of a Killer. A team led by Austrian archaeologist Gerhard took measurements of the skull of Ephesus. They fed them into facial reconstruction software and produced an image, the face of a young woman. But the team went further than the shape of the face. They claimed something that would set the world ablaze, that the proportions of the skull, particularly certain cranial measurements, suggested that the woman's mother may have had African ancestry. And then they made the leap that would generate 15 years of controversy. If Cleopatra's sister had African ancestry, then Cleopatra, who shared a father with Arsinoë, might too. The news spread around the world within hours. For 500 years, European art had imagined Cleopatra as a fair-skinned woman, an ideal of Greco-Roman beauty. If the 2009 study was right, all of that could be false. The debate was immediate, passionate, and often toxic. Historians in favour. Academics against. Activists claiming Cleopatra's legacy. Egyptologists defending the Hellenistic heritage of the Ptolemaic dynasty, which was of Greek Macedonian origin. For 15 years, that skull was one of the central pieces of the debate over the ethnic origin of one of history's most famous women. Documentaries, books, museum reconstructions, the controversial 2023 Netflix series about Cleopatra. All of it, to a greater or lesser extent, connected to that skull from Ephesus. But there was a problem almost no one wanted to see. The 2009 study was never conclusive. It was based on cranial measurements and a facial reconstruction, not a complete genetic analysis. The technology to extract reliable ancient DNA from a 2,000-year-old skull existed, but had not been fully applied. For 15 years, a global debate rested on a hypothesis that had never been fully proven, until someone decided to prove it. In 2024, a different team, led by evolutionary anthropologist Gerhard decided to close the case once and for all. They had technology that didn't exist in 2009. Computed microtomography capable of analysing internal bone structures invisible to the naked eye, mass spectrometry to refine radiocarbon dating, and ancient DNA sequencing, capable of extracting genetic information from tiny degraded samples. They took samples from the inner ear and the base of the skull, the areas with the best preservation of ancient DNA. They sent them to independent laboratories for cross-analysis. They compared the results with genetic databases of Mediterranean, Egyptian, Hellenistic, Levantine, and European populations. The tests took months. When the results came in, they bore no resemblance to what the world had accepted for a century. First revelation. The microscanner revealed the cranial sutures, the lines where bones fused together during growth. In an adult, those sutures are closed. In this skull, they were not. The skull did not belong to an adult. Dental analysis confirmed it. It belonged to someone between 11 and 14 years old, not a 22-year-old woman, as Arsinoë was at the time of her death. A child. Second revelation. The genetic analysis identified the sex chromosome. It was not XX. It was XI. The skull of Ephesus did not belong to a woman. It belonged to a boy. Third revelation. The morphological analysis detected significant anomalies in the skull's structure, asymmetries, bone malformations. Compatible, according to the study, with Treacher-Collins syndrome, a rare genetic condition present in 1 in 50,000 births that causes severe facial malformations from infancy. The boy in the sarcophagus was ill. Fourth revelation. The most unexpected. The ancient Dina was compared with genetic databases from across the region. He had no Egyptian ancestry. He had no Greek ancestry. He He had no African ancestry. His DNA was compatible with populations from central Italy or Sardinia. The 3 unanswered questions, the results, close one case and open 3 others. First, the debate over Cleopatra's ethnic origin, which for 15 years partly rested on the 2009 study, is now stripped of that evidence. It does not prove that Cleopatra was white. It does not prove that she was black. It only proves that the skull some used in that debate never had anything to do with her family. The question remains open, but it is now discussed without a false piece of evidence muddying the waters. Second, if the skull is not Arsinoë's, where are her remains? Cleopatra's sister died in Ephesus. She was given a tomb. Her body had to exist somewhere. Was it looted in antiquity? Does it lie beneath other buildings in the city? Was it lost forever? Archaeology does not know. To this day, the remains of Cleopatra's most famous rival are still missing. And third, the most unsettling mystery. Who was the boy in the sarcophagus? A sick child, originally from Italy, buried in a monumental Egyptian-style mausoleum in a Greek city under Roman rule. No name, no inscription, no offerings. But someone built for him one of the most spectacular tombs in Ephesus. Someone transported him 2,000 kilometers from his homeland. Someone wanted to remember him. And history has completely forgotten who he was. For 100 years, we gave this boy the name of Cleopatra's sister. We invented an identity for him. We built upon him books, documentaries, racial debates, cultural controversies, and all along, his bones waited on a shelf in Vienna, with a yellowed note that read simply, "Skull of Ephesus." Science gave him back the truth of who he was not. Who he truly was, no one still knows.